The wind howled like a wounded animal as Zelda Everhart stumbled through the snow-covered main street of Cedar Springs, Wyoming. Her worn boots leaving uneven tracks in the fresh powder that already reached her ankles. She clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, knowing full well it would do little against the December cold that seemed to seep into her very bones, and knocked on the door of the boarding house with fingers so numb she could barely feel the wood beneath them. Mrs. Patterson opened the door just wide enough to peer out with suspicious eyes, taking in Zelda's travel-stained dress and the small carpet bag that contained everything she owned in this world. "We do not take in charity cases," the woman said before Zelda could even speak. "And we certainly do not have rooms for young women traveling alone without proper references." "I have money," Zelda said quickly, reaching into her pocket with shaking fingers to pull out the few coins she had left. "I can pay for just one night, maybe two, until the storm passes." Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened further as she looked at the meager offering in Zelda's palm. "That would not even cover half a night's lodging, and besides, I already told you we are full up. Try the Hendersons down the street." The door slammed shut with such finality that Zelda felt the rejection like a physical blow. She turned away from the boarding house, blinking back tears that she refused to let fall and freeze on her cheeks, and made her way to the next establishment. The Hendersons' place was smaller, shabbier, with paint peeling from the shutters and a crooked sign hanging above the door. Surely they would be less particular about their guests. Mr. Henderson answered her knock, a large man with a tobacco-stained beard and eyes that looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "A room," he repeated when she asked. "For a young lady all alone, I do not think my wife would approve of that. We run a respectable establishment here." "Please," Zelda said, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to keep it out. "I just need somewhere warm to sleep. The storm is getting worse." "Should have thought of that before you came wandering out here in the middle of winter," he said, and shut the door just as firmly as Mrs. Patterson had. Zelda stood in the falling snow, watching the flakes accumulate on her sleeves, and felt the full weight of her situation pressing down on her. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago, running from a man her father had promised her to in marriage, a merchant twice her age with cruel hands and crueler words. She had thought she could make it to California, where her mother's sister supposedly lived, but her money had run out faster than she had anticipated, and the winter had come early and harsh. Cedar Springs was supposed to be just a brief stop, a place to rest and perhaps find work for a few days to replenish her funds. But now, as she trudged through the snow to the third boarding house in town, she was beginning to realize that a young woman traveling alone in 1885 was viewed with suspicion and scorn, especially one who clearly had no money and no connections. The third boarding house turned her away before she even finished explaining her situation. The fourth did not even open the door all the way. By the time Zelda had been rejected by every establishment in Cedar Springs that might have offered her shelter, the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak, and her fingers and toes had gone from painful to frighteningly numb. She found herself standing in front of the general store, watching through the frosted window as the shopkeeper began to close up for the night. In desperation, she pushed open the door, causing the bell above to jingle merrily in stark contrast to her misery. "We are closing," the shopkeeper said without looking up from his ledger. "I know, I am sorry. I just need to know if there is anywhere else in town that might have a room," Zelda said, her voice barely above a whisper because she was trying so hard to keep her teeth from chattering. The shopkeeper finally looked at her, and his expression shifted from annoyance to something that might have been pity. "You are the girl who has been going door to door, are you not? Word travels fast in a town this size. I am afraid if the boarding houses would not take you, there is nowhere else. This is not a big town. Is there a church? Maybe the pastor would let me sleep in the pews just for tonight." He shook his head slowly. "Pastor Wilkins left yesterday to visit his daughter in Cheyenne. Church is locked up tight." "Look, miss, I do not know what brought you here, but this is not a place for a young woman alone, especially not in winter. You should head back to wherever you came from." "I cannot," Zelda said, and to her horror, her voice broke on the words. "I have nowhere to go back to." The shopkeeper's expression softened a bit more, but he still shook his head. "I am sorry, I truly am, but I have a wife and daughters at home, and they would not understand me bringing home a stranger. Best I can tell you is to head east out of town. There is a ranch about 5 miles down the road, the Orchard Spread. Preston Orchard runs it with his brothers. They might have a barn you could shelter in, at least to get out of the cold. 5 miles in this snow in the dark, with no guarantee of shelter at the end of it." But what choice did she have? Zelda nodded her thanks and stepped back out into the storm, which had intensified while she had been inside. The snow was falling so thickly now that she could barely see more than a few feet in front of her, and the wind cut through her inadequate clothing like knives. She began walking east, following the road out of town as best she could, though the snow had already obscured most of it. Her carpetbag grew heavier with each step, but she could not abandon it because it held the few precious items she had managed to bring from her old life, including her mother's Bible and the quilt her grandmother had made. Time lost all meaning as she walked. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing through the cold that seemed to freeze her lungs with each inhale. She fell twice, struggled back to her feet both times, and kept going because stopping meant dying, and she had not come all this way just to freeze to death on a Wyoming road. When she finally saw the warm glow of lamplight through the snow, she thought at first that she was hallucinating. But as she drew closer, the light resolved into windows, and the windows belonged to a large ranch house with smoke curling from the chimney. Relief flooded through her so intensely that her legs nearly gave out. She stumbled up the porch steps, nearly falling again, and knocked on the door with what little strength she had left. For a long moment, nothing happened, and panic began to rise in her throat. What if they would not answer? What if they turned her away like everyone else had? Then the door opened, and warmth and light spilled out into the cold darkness. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that were a striking blue even in the lamplight. He wore work clothes and suspenders, and he was in his stocking feet as if he had just settled in for the evening. "Please," Zelda managed to say through her chattering teeth. "Please, I need help." The man's eyes widened as he took in her snow-covered appearance, the ice in her hair, the way she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Good Lord," he said, and his voice was deep and warm with a hint of concern that made something in Zelda's chest tighten. Come in right now." He reached out and took her arm, gently guiding her inside, and Zelda was so stunned by the kindness of the gesture that she almost started crying right there. The warmth of the house hit her like a wall, painful on her frozen skin, but so wonderful that she could have wept from that alone. "Preston, what in the world?" Another voice called from deeper in the house, and a younger man appeared in the hallway, similar in features to the man who had let her in but perhaps a few years younger. "Found her on the porch half frozen to death," Preston said, still holding Zelda's arm as if he was afraid she might collapse, which was probably a valid concern. "Go get some blankets and stoke the fire higher, and put water on to heat for tea." The younger man disappeared without argument, and Preston guided Zelda to a chair near the fireplace. "Sit down before you fall down," he said gently. "What were you doing out in this storm?" "I walked from Cedar Springs," Zelda said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "The shopkeeper said your ranch was 5 miles east." 5 miles. Preston's voice rose in disbelief. "You walked 5 miles in this blizzard. Are you out of your mind? You could have died out there." "I almost did," Zelda admitted. And now that she was sitting in the warmth and safety of this house, the full terror of what she had just survived hit her, and she did start to cry, silent tears streaming down her cheeks as her body continued to shake. Preston looked alarmed by her tears, but he did not back away or tell her to stop. Instead, he knelt down in front of her chair and began to carefully remove her wet boots. "These are soaked through," he muttered. "Your feet must be like blocks of ice." The younger man returned with an armful of blankets and began draping them around Zelda's shoulders. "I am Quinn," he said. "Preston's brother. What is your name?" "Zelda," she managed. "Zelda Everhart." "Well, Miss Everhart, you gave us quite a scare showing up like that," Quinn said, but his tone was kind. "Let me get that tea going." Preston had removed both her boots and was now gently rubbing her feet through her stockings, trying to restore circulation. It was an incredibly intimate gesture from a stranger, but Zelda was too cold and too grateful to protest. "Why were you walking from Cedar Springs in a blizzard?" he asked, his voice low and calm as if he was trying not to spook a frightened animal. "I needed somewhere to stay," Zelda said, wiping at her tears with a shaking hand. "I went to every boarding house in town, but they all turned me away. The shopkeeper said you might let me shelter in your barn." Preston's hands stilled on her feet, and he looked up at her with an expression she could not quite read. "The barn? In this weather? You would have frozen to death out there just as surely as on the road." He resumed his gentle massage of her feet, and Zelda could feel painful pins and needles as sensation started to return. "Every boarding house turned you away," she nodded miserably. "They said they did not take charity cases, or that they did not have room, or that they could not house a young woman traveling alone. I have a little money, but not enough, I suppose." "That is ridiculous," Preston said, and there was anger in his voice now, though Zelda did not think it was directed at her. "What kind of Christian turns away someone in need in the middle of a blizzard? The kind that lives in Cedar Springs, apparently," Quinn called from the kitchen. Preston shook his head in disgust. "Well, you are here now, and you are staying here. We have a guest room upstairs that my mother used to keep for visitors. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry and has a proper bed." Zelda stared at him, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "You would let me stay, just like that? You do not even know me." "I know you are half frozen and far from home and in need of help," Preston said simply. "That is all I need to know. My door is always open for anyone who needs it, and I mean that." Something in the simple sincerity of his words, in the genuine kindness in his eyes, broke through the last of Zelda's defenses, and she began to cry in earnest, great gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Preston looked alarmed again, but he did not pull away. Instead, he moved from kneeling in front of her to sitting on the arm of her chair, and he awkwardly patted her shoulder through the blankets. "It is all right," he said softly. "You are safe now. No one is going to turn you away or make you go back out into the cold. You can stay as long as you need to." Quinn appeared with a cup of hot tea which he pressed into Zelda's hands. "Drink this. It will help warm you from the inside." Zelda wrapped her shaking fingers around the cup, grateful for the warmth, and took a sip. The tea was strong and sweet, and it did help, spreading warmth through her chest and belly. She managed to get her crying under control, though she still felt shaky and overwhelmed. "I am sorry," she said, her voice rough from crying. "I do not usually fall apart like this." "You have nothing to apologize for," Preston said firmly. "You have been through an ordeal. Anyone would be upset." "Where are you traveling from?" Quinn asked, pulling up another chair. "If you do not mind my asking." Zelda hesitated, then decided that these men had shown her nothing but kindness and they deserved some explanation. "St. Louis. I was trying to get to California to my aunt, but I ran out of money faster than I expected, and then the winter came early." "St. Louis to California is a hell of a journey, pardon my language," Preston said. "Especially for a woman traveling alone. Why did you not take the train?" "I did, part of the way, but the tickets are expensive and I had to save what I could," Zelda said. She did not mention that she had left in a hurry in the middle of the night with only what she could carry. That part of the story could wait. "And you have been traveling since when?" Quinn asked. "About 3 weeks. I have been stopping in towns along the way, trying to find work for a few days to earn enough to keep going, but it has been difficult." That was an understatement. It had been nearly impossible. No one wanted to hire a young woman with no references and no family, especially not for just a few days. Preston frowned thoughtfully. "Well, you are not going anywhere in this storm, that is for certain. The blizzard is supposed to last at least another day or two, maybe longer. You will stay here until it passes, and we can figure out what to do after that." "I can pay," Zelda said quickly, though she knew the coins in her pocket would not cover even a fraction of what room and board should cost. "I do not want your money," Preston said, his voice gentle but firm. "You are a guest, not a boarder." "But I cannot just take your charity," Zelda protested. "I could work. I could help with cooking or cleaning or whatever needs doing." Preston and Quinn exchanged a glance, and then Preston nodded slowly. "If it would make you feel better to help out, I will not stop you. But right now you need to rest and get warm. Quinn, would you heat some water for a bath? Miss Everhart needs to thaw out properly." "I can do that," Quinn said, standing up. "There is a washtub in the kitchen." "It will take a bit to heat enough water, though." "That is fine," Preston said. He looked back at Zelda. "When was the last time you ate?" Zelda had to think about it. "Yesterday afternoon, I think. I had some bread and cheese." Preston's frown deepened. "Quinn, also see what we have for supper." "Miss Everhart needs a proper meal." "We have stew left from dinner," Quinn said. "I will heat some up." As Quinn bustled off to the kitchen, Preston stood and added another log to the fire. "I apologize that it is just me and Quinn here. Our younger brother Samuel is out checking on the cattle with some of our ranch hands, making sure they are all in shelter from the storm. He should be back soon. And I am afraid our housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, went to visit her sister in Laramie last week and has not made it back yet because of the weather." "You do not need to apologize," Zelda said. "You have been incredibly kind. I cannot thank you enough." Preston turned to look at her, and in the firelight she could see his face more clearly. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, with strong features and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. "You do not need to thank me for basic human decency," he said. "Though I am sorry you have encountered so little of it on your journey. People are afraid, I think," Zelda said softly. "A woman traveling alone, it is not normal. They think there must be something wrong with me." "Is there?" Preston asked, but there was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity. Zelda met his eyes steadily. "Only that I refused to marry a man I did not love, and my father was willing to force me into it anyway." Preston's expression darkened. "Then your father is a fool and you were right to leave." The simple validation of her choice, something she had been second-guessing for weeks, brought fresh tears to Zelda's eyes. She blinked them back and took another sip of tea. Most people would not see it that way. Most people would say a daughter should obey her father no matter what. Most people are also fools, Preston said bluntly. You have a right to choose your own life, your own husband if you want one. No one should be able to force you into something against your will. Zelda found herself smiling despite everything. You have very progressive views, Mr. Orchard. Preston, please. And I just have common sense. My mother would have skinned me alive if she thought I believed otherwise. His expression softened at the mention of his mother. She passed away 2 years ago, but she was the strongest woman I ever knew. Came out here with my father when this was nothing but empty prairie, helped build this ranch from the ground up. She would have liked you. How can you possibly know that? You just met me. Because you walked 5 miles through a blizzard rather than give up, Preston said simply. My mother always respected people with that kind of determination. Quinn returned to announce that water was heating for a bath, and that stew would be ready in a few minutes. Preston helped Zelda to her feet, steadying her when she swayed, and guided her to the kitchen where a proper meal awaited her. The stew was rich and hearty, full of beef and vegetables, and Zelda ate it so quickly that she nearly made herself sick. Slow down, Preston said gently. It is not going anywhere. Zelda forced herself to eat more slowly, savoring the warmth and flavor of the meal. When she had finished, Quinn showed her to the kitchen where the washtub was filled with steaming water. He handed her a bar of soap and a towel, then politely left her alone. Zelda stripped off her wet, dirty clothes and sank into the hot water with a sigh of pure relief. She scrubbed herself clean, washing away days of travel grime and the terror of the evening, and let herself relax for the first time in weeks. By the time she climbed out and dried off, she felt almost human again. She put her chemise and petticoat back on, as they were the least dirty of her clothes, and wrapped herself in the blanket Quinn had left for her. When she emerged from the kitchen, Preston was waiting in the hallway. Quinn is preparing the guest room for you, he said. If you give me your wet clothes, I will hang them by the fire to dry. Zelda handed over her dress and stockings, trying not to feel embarrassed about standing in front of a strange man in her undergarments, even if she was wrapped in a blanket. Preston took the clothes without comment and led her upstairs to a small but comfortable room with a large bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the snowy landscape. There is a nightgown in the dresser that belonged to my mother, Preston said. You are welcome to use it, and in the morning we can see about finding you something else to wear. You are a bit smaller than my mother was, but we can make something work. Thank you, Zelda said softly, for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not taken me in. Preston's expression was serious. You do not need to think about that because it did not happen. You are here, you are safe, and that is all that matters. Get some rest, Miss Everhart. Things will look better in the morning. He left, closing the door gently behind him, and Zelda found the nightgown in the dresser. It was soft flannel, worn from many washings but clean and warm. She put it on, climbed into the bed, and burrowed under the quilts. The mattress was the most comfortable thing she had felt in weeks, and she was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. She woke the next morning to voices downstairs and sunlight streaming through the window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into a pristine white wonderland. Zelda lay in bed for a moment, warm and comfortable and safe, and felt tears prick her eyes again at the sheer relief of it all. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. "Come in," she called. Preston entered carrying a tray with breakfast, eggs and bacon and toast and coffee. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Zelda admitted, Is the storm over? For now, but there is another one coming in tomorrow, according to my brother Samuel. He has a knack for reading the weather. You are stuck with us for a while, I am afraid. I do not mind, Zelda said softly. You have been so kind. Preston smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. Eat your breakfast before it gets cold. When you are ready, come downstairs and we will see about finding you some proper clothes. Zelda ate quickly, marveling at the normalcy of it all, the simple pleasure of a hot meal in a warm bed. When she had finished, she made her way downstairs in the nightgown and blanket, feeling a bit self-conscious but not knowing what else to do. She found Preston and Quinn in the parlor with a third man who must have been Samuel. He was younger than both of them, perhaps 22 or 23, with lighter hair and a ready smile. All three men stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that surprised her. Miss Everhart, this is our brother Samuel, Preston said. Samuel, this is Zelda Everhart. She will be staying with us until the weather clears. Pleased to meet you, Miss Everhart, Samuel said, tipping an imaginary hat. Preston told me about your adventure last night. You are lucky to be alive. I know, Zelda said quietly. I owe your brother my life. Nonsense, Preston said quickly. You owe me nothing, but we do need to get you properly dressed. Come with me. He led her to a room on the first floor that appeared to be a storage room of sorts. There was a trunk against one wall, and Preston opened it to reveal women's clothing neatly folded inside. These were my mother's, he said softly. She was a bit taller than you and a bit wider, but we can make alterations. Please, take whatever you need. Zelda looked through the trunk with reverent hands. The clothes were well made and sturdy, the kind of practical garments a ranch woman would need. She selected a simple day dress in dark blue wool, a warmer petticoat, and some stockings. Are you sure? She asked. These are your mother's things. She would want them to be used, Preston said firmly. She never liked the idea of things going to waste. Take them, please. Zelda carried the clothes back upstairs and changed, finding that the dress was indeed too large but not impossibly so. When she came back down, Preston took one look at her and disappeared, returning with a sewing kit. My mother taught all of us boys to mend our own clothes, he said. I am not great at it, but I can take this in enough to make it wearable. I can do it, Zelda protested, but Preston shook his head. You said you wanted to help out around here. I am giving you the day to rest and recover. Tomorrow, if you are feeling up to it, there is plenty of work to go around, but today you rest. It was not a request, and Zelda found herself sitting in the parlor while Preston took the dress and made adjustments. Quinn brought her a book to read, and Samuel regaled her with stories about the ranch and the surrounding area. It was the most relaxed Zelda had felt since leaving St. Louis, and she found herself laughing at Samuel's jokes and asking Preston questions about the ranch. That evening, Preston's alterations proved to be surprisingly skillful, and the dress fit her much better. She insisted on helping with supper preparation, and Quinn taught her how to make biscuits the way their mother used to. It was domestic and comfortable, and Zelda felt a pang of longing for something she had never really had, a home where she felt welcome and valued. Over the next few days, as the predicted second storm rolled in and then a third, Zelda settled into life at the Orchard Ranch. She helped with cooking and cleaning, mended clothes, and even assisted with some of the lighter ranch work when the weather permitted. Preston was always nearby, showing her how things worked, telling her about the ranch and his family's history. She learned that Preston was 29, Quinn was 26, and Samuel was 23. Their father had died 5 years ago in a riding accident, and their mother had passed away 2 years later from pneumonia. Preston had taken over running the ranch, and his brothers had stayed on to help. They had a few ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, but the brothers preferred to do most of the work themselves. Preston was a natural leader, calm and competent, with a dry sense of humor that caught Zelda off guard and made her laugh. He was also incredibly kind, always making sure she had everything she needed, checking that she was warm enough, bringing her extra blankets or a cup of tea without being asked. It was the kind of thoughtfulness that came naturally to him, and Zelda found herself drawn to him in a way she had not expected. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the easy strength in the way he moved, the patience he showed with the animals and his brothers. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he always listened when she spoke as if what she said truly mattered to him. It was dangerous, she knew, to develop feelings for a man who was simply being kind to her out of the goodness of his heart. But as the days turned into a week and then 2 weeks, Zelda found it harder and harder to guard her heart against Preston Orchard. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Samuel and Quinn having already retired to bed, Preston turned to her with a serious expression. "The weather is supposed to clear tomorrow," he said quietly. "For good this time, spring is coming early." Zelda's heart sank. She knew what he was saying. It was time for her to move on. "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I suppose I should start thinking about continuing my journey." "Is that what you want?" Preston asked, his blue eyes searching her face. "To go to California." "It was the plan," Zelda said slowly. "My aunt is there, or at least she was the last time my mother heard from her. That was several years ago. So you do not even know if she is still there, or if she would take you in." Zelda had to admit that no, she did not know either of those things. "But I have to try. I cannot just stay here forever imposing on your hospitality." "What if you were not imposing?" Preston said, leaning forward in his chair. "What if I asked you to stay?" Zelda's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Preston ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I mean that we need help around here. Mrs. Chen is getting older and she cannot do all the cooking and cleaning by herself anymore. And you fit in here, Zelda. You work hard, you do not complain, and my brothers like you. I like you." "You are offering me a job?" Zelda asked, trying to understand what he was saying. "I am offering you a place," Preston said. "A home if you want it. We would pay you a fair wage for your work, of course, and you would have your own room and all your meals. But more than that, you would be part of the family. We take care of our own." It was more than Zelda had dared to hope for, a real home and honest work and people who valued her. But there was something in Preston's eyes, something more than just an employer offering a position, and she had to know what it was. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you want me to stay?" Preston was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Because the thought of you leaving makes me realize how much I have come to care for you. I know it is too soon. I know you barely know me, but Zelda, I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw, and Zelda felt her heart begin to race. "Preston, I cannot let you offer me charity because you feel sorry for me." "This is not charity," Preston said fiercely, "and it is not pity. I have known you for 2 weeks, and in that time, you have become the best part of my day. I wake up thinking about seeing you at breakfast, and I go to sleep thinking about the conversations we had by the fire. You are brave and strong and kind, and when you laugh, it is the most beautiful sound in the world. So no, this is not charity. This is me telling you that I want you to stay because I cannot imagine this house without you in it anymore." Zelda stood up, her legs shaking, and Preston stood too, reaching for her hands. "I do not expect you to feel the same way," he said quickly. "I know I am just some rancher in the middle of nowhere, and you have your whole life ahead of you. But if there is even a chance that you might come to care for me the way I care for you, then please stay. Give us a chance." "Preston," Zelda said, her voice breaking. "I already care for you. I have been trying not to because I thought I would have to leave and it would hurt too much. But every day I have been here, I have fallen a little more in love with you, with this place, with the life you have built. I just did not think that someone like you could ever want someone like me." "Someone like you," Preston repeated incredulously. "Zelda, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. You walked away from everything you knew to make your own life. You walked 5 miles through a blizzard rather than give up. You face every challenge with courage and grace. Why would I not want someone like you?" Zelda felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months, they were happy tears. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I want to stay here with you." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Zelda wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "Thank you for giving me a chance." They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, and when Preston finally pulled back to look at her, his eyes were shining. "I am going to court you properly," he said. "I am going to take you on picnics and teach you to ride, and I am going to show you every beautiful place on this ranch. And when enough time has passed that you are sure, truly sure, I am going to ask you to marry me." "And I am going to say yes," Zelda said, smiling through her tears. "I am going to say yes," Preston orchard, "because you saw me when everyone else looked away. You opened your door when everyone else closed theirs, and you made me feel like I was worth something again." Preston cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You were always worth something, Zelda. You were always valuable and deserving of love and respect. I am just grateful that I get to be the one to show you that." And then he kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise, and Zelda kissed him back, pouring all her hope and gratitude and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling, and Zelda felt like she could float away from sheer happiness. The next morning, Preston announced to his brothers that Zelda would be staying on permanently, and both Quinn and Samuel cheered and welcomed her officially to the family. Mrs. Chen returned a few days later and was delighted to have help with the housework, and she immediately took Zelda under her wing, teaching her all the tricks of running a ranch household. Preston was true to his word about courting Zelda properly. He took her on long rides across the ranch land, showing her the mountains in the distance and the creek that ran through the property. He taught her to fish and to identify different types of wildflowers. He brought her gifts, simple things like a pretty rock he found or a book he thought she would enjoy. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their pasts and their dreams for the future. Zelda told him more about her life in St. Louis, about her mother who had died when she was young and her father who had become distant and controlling after her death. Preston told her about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and their love story, about his hopes to expand the ranch and make it even more successful. As winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, Zelda blossomed under Preston's care and attention. She gained weight, her cheeks filling out and her body becoming healthier. She laughed more, smiled more, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually disappeared. The ranch became her home in a way nowhere had ever been before, and the Orchard brothers became her family. Preston was patient, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. They held hands and stole kisses when they had moments alone, but he was always respectful, always treating her like she was precious. And Zelda fell more deeply in love with him every day. It was in late August, as they sat by the creek watching the sunset, that Preston took her hand and said, "I think enough time has passed." Zelda looked at him, her heart beginning to race. "Enough time for what?" Preston smiled and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. He opened it to reveal a ring, simple gold with a small diamond. "Enough time for me to ask you to marry me. Zelda Everhart, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You have brought light and laughter into this house, and you have given me a reason to look forward to every new day. I love you more than I can possibly express, and I would be honored if you would agree to be my wife." Zelda's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Preston, of course I will marry you." Preston slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Zelda kissed him back with all the love and passion she had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "When?" Zelda asked breathlessly. "When do you want to get married?" "As soon as possible," Preston said. "Unless you want a big wedding with lots of planning." Zelda shook her head emphatically. "I do not need a big wedding, I just need you." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Cedar Springs. Zelda wore a dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, white lace and satin, simple but beautiful. Preston wore his best suit, and he looked so handsome that Zelda's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. Quinn and Samuel stood as witnesses, along with Mrs. Chen and a few of the ranch hands. The shopkeeper who had directed Zelda to the ranch that fateful night was there, looking pleased with himself, as if he had personally arranged the whole thing. Even some of the townspeople who had turned Zelda away that winter showed up, though Zelda noticed they had the grace to look ashamed. But Zelda did not care about any of that. All she cared about was Preston, standing there with tears in his eyes as she walked down the aisle toward him. All she cared about was the way he took her hands and promised to love her and cherish her for the rest of his life. All she cared about was becoming his wife and starting their life together. The reception was held at the ranch, a joyful celebration with food and music and dancing. Preston waltzed with Zelda under the stars, holding her close and whispering how much he loved her. And when the celebration finally wound down and the guests departed, Preston carried Zelda over the threshold of their home, and she laughed with pure joy. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Preston taking his time to show Zelda how much he loved her, worshiping her body with gentle hands and whispered words of love. And Zelda gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her heart and her body and her future. In the months that followed, Zelda settled into married life with ease. She and Preston worked side by side running the ranch, making decisions together, planning for the future. They talked about expanding the herd and building a new barn. They talked about children and what kind of family they wanted to build. Their first child was born the following summer, a healthy baby boy they named Peter, after Preston's father. Zelda had been terrified during the pregnancy and labor, but Preston had been by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her. And when she held their son for the first time, looked down at his tiny, perfect face, she felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. Preston was a devoted father, doting on Peter and helping with night feedings and diaper changes without complaint. Zelda watched him cradle their son with such gentleness and love, and she fell in love with him all over again. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a beautiful little girl they named Margaret after Preston's mother. Peter was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her, and Preston joked that they were raising a good big brother. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Preston's careful management and Zelda's hard work paid off, and they were able to hire more hands and expand their operations. The Orchard Ranch became known throughout Wyoming for the quality of their cattle and horses, and people came from miles around to do business with them. But despite their success, Preston and Zelda never forgot where they had come from or how they had found each other. Every winter, they made a point of opening their home to travelers who might need shelter from the cold. They never turned anyone away, remembering how Zelda had been rejected at every stop until she found Preston's door. They became known for their generosity and kindness, and the ranch became a place of refuge for those in need. More than once, they took in people who had nowhere else to go, giving them work and a place to stay until they could get back on their feet. Quinn eventually married a schoolteacher from Cheyenne, a sweet woman named Rachel who fit into the family perfectly. Samuel married a few years later, choosing the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited woman named Beth who could ride and rope as well as any man. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and soon it was full of children and laughter and love. Through it all, Preston and Zelda remained devoted to each other. They still took rides out to the creek to watch the sunset, still stole kisses in the barn when they thought no one was watching. They weathered hardships together, including a terrible drought one year and a harsh winter that killed part of their herd another year. But they faced every challenge as partners, supporting each other and never losing faith. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Zelda with a trip to San Francisco. It was the farthest she had traveled since arriving at the ranch, and she was nervous about leaving the children. But Preston insisted that Quinn and Rachel would take excellent care of Peter and Margaret, and that they deserved this time together. San Francisco was overwhelming and exciting, so different from the wide, open spaces of Wyoming. Preston took her to fancy restaurants and the theater, bought her beautiful dresses and jewelry. But Zelda's favorite part was just being alone with her husband, walking along the waterfront hand in hand, talking and laughing like they had in those early days of courtship. On their last night in the city, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room looking out at the lights, Preston pulled Zelda close and said, "Do you ever regret it, staying with me instead of going to California like you planned?" Zelda turned to look at him in surprise. "Regret it? Preston, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted, a home and a family and a love I did not think existed. Why would you even ask that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Preston said softly. "That you do not feel like you gave up your dreams for me." "You are my dream," Zelda said firmly. "You and our children and our life together. I would not change a single thing, Preston, not one single thing." Preston kissed her then, deep and passionate, and they made love with the windows open and the sound of the city below them. And Zelda thought about how far she had come from that terrified girl stumbling through a blizzard, and how grateful she was for every twist and turn that had led her to this moment. They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And there were challenges, because life on a ranch was never easy. But they faced them together, as they always had, as they always would. Peter grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Margaret became a talented rider and had a way with horses that amazed everyone. Preston and Zelda had 2 more children in the years that followed, another son named James and a daughter named Sarah, and the ranch house was always full of noise and activity. As Preston and Zelda grew older, their love only deepened. They developed the comfortable intimacy of a couple who had weathered decades together, who knew each other's thoughts and could communicate with just a glance. Preston still brought Zelda wildflowers, and she still made his favorite biscuits. They still took rides together when they could, though now they moved a bit slower, and Preston's hair had gone silver. When Peter announced that he was ready to take over running the ranch, Preston agreed with pride and relief. He and Zelda stepped back from the day-to-day operations, though they still helped out when needed. They had more time to spend with their grandchildren, who adored them and begged for stories about the old days. Zelda would tell them about the winter she arrived, about walking through the blizzard and being turned away from every door until she found their grandfathers. And Preston would add his part of the story, about opening the door to find a half-frozen angel on his porch, about knowing from that first moment that she was special. The grandchildren never tired of hearing about how their grandparents fell in love, and Zelda never tired of telling it. Because it was a story worth telling, a story of kindness and courage and love that endured. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren came from near and far, and even some of the original ranch hands who had retired years ago showed up to pay their respects. The party went on all day and into the night, with food and music and dancing. At one point, Preston pulled Zelda away from the crowd and led her to the porch where they had first met. 40 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. 40 years since you knocked on this door and changed my life forever. Our lives, Zelda corrected, leaning against him. You changed mine just as much as I changed yours. I still remember how you looked that night, Preston said softly. So scared and cold and determined. I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met. I remember thinking that you were my salvation, Zelda said. And you were, Preston. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. Preston turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders, his blue eyes still as striking as they had been 40 years ago. I love you, Zelda Orchard. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for opening your door to me. Thank you for giving me a home and a family and a life beyond my wildest dreams. They kissed there on the porch, surrounded by the sounds of their family celebrating inside, and Zelda thought about how different her life could have been. If Preston had turned her away like everyone else had, if he had sent her to the barn instead of inviting her inside, if he had not been the kind of man who believed that his door should always be open to those in need. But he had not turned her away. He had welcomed her, cared for her, loved her. And in doing so, he had given her everything she had ever wanted and so much more. As the years continued to pass, Preston and Zelda grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They spent their days sitting on the porch watching their grandchildren play, telling stories and enjoying the peaceful life they had built together. When Preston's health began to fail, Zelda never left his side. She held his hand through the long nights, reminded him of all the wonderful years they had shared, and promised him that she would be all right, because he had given her the strength to face anything. Preston passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, surrounded by his family. Zelda held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart was breaking, she was grateful that they had been given so many years together. She whispered that she loved him, that she would see him again someday, and that she would never forget the gift he had given her all those years ago. At Preston's funeral, people came from all over Wyoming to pay their respects. They told stories about his generosity and kindness, about how he had helped them when they needed it most, about how he had made the world a better place simply by being in it. And Zelda listened to all of it with pride, knowing that the man she had loved had touched so many lives. Zelda lived for another 8 years after Preston's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She spent her final years sharing the story of her life with anyone who would listen, making sure that Preston's memory and his legacy of kindness would never be forgotten. She told them about being rejected at every winter stop, about walking through a blizzard with no hope left, about finding a door that was open when all others had been closed. She told them about the cowboy who had said his door was always open and how he had meant it in every possible way. When Zelda passed away in her sleep at the age of 83, she had a smile on her face, and those who found her said it looked like she was dreaming of something wonderful. Her family liked to think that she was reunited with Preston, that they were together again in whatever came after this life. They buried her next to Preston on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree where they had often sat together. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates and a single line that Zelda had requested before she died. His door was always open. The ranch continued to thrive under Peter's management, and then under his children's management, passed down through the generations. The Orchard family never forgot the story of how it all began, of the woman who had been rejected everywhere until she found the one place that would take her in. And they honored Preston and Zelda's legacy by continuing the tradition of never turning away anyone who needed help. The door to the Orchard Ranch was always open, just as Preston had promised all those years ago, just as he and Zelda had lived their entire lives. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually learn the story, sitting on that same porch where Zelda had first knocked, and they would understand the importance of kindness and generosity, and keeping your door open to those in need. They would understand that sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who have been rejected everywhere else, and that opening your door to them might change not just their life but yours as well. The ranch stood as a testament to the love story that had begun on a cold winter night in 1885, when a desperate woman had knocked on a door and a kind man had answered. It was a love story that had started with rejection and acceptance, with cold and warmth, with despair and hope. But most importantly, it was a love story that had endured through decades and generations, proving that true love built on kindness and respect and genuine care for another person could withstand anything. And so the legacy lived on, carried forward by children and grandchildren who had been raised on the story of Preston and Zelda, who had learned from their example what it meant to truly love someone, to truly open your door and your heart to another person. The ranch remained a place of refuge and safety, where anyone who needed help could find it, where doors were always open and love was always abundant. In the town of Cedar Springs, which had grown considerably over the years, there was eventually a historical marker placed near where the old boarding houses had once stood. It told the story of Zelda Everhart, who had been turned away on a cold winter night, and Preston Orchard, who had taken her in. It told the story of how their love had built one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming, and how their legacy of kindness had touched countless lives. Tourists would sometimes stop to read the marker and take pictures, moved by the romance of the story. Locals would tell their own versions, embellished over the years, but always true in the ways that mattered. And the Orchard family would smile and nod and know that Preston and Zelda's story would never truly end, because love like theirs was eternal. Back at the ranch, in the main house that had been expanded and renovated but still retained its original character, there was a wall dedicated to family history. There hung a photograph of Preston and Zelda on their wedding day, young and beautiful and so clearly in love that it made people's hearts ache to see it. Next to it was a photograph from their 40th anniversary, older and grayer but with that same love shining in their eyes. And beneath the photographs was a framed piece of embroidery that Zelda had made in the later years of her life. It depicted a snow-covered ranch house with lights shining from the windows and a door standing open. And stitched beneath it were the words that had defined their entire relationship, the words that Preston had said to her that first night and had proven true every day of their lives together. "My door is always open for you." Those words had meant shelter from the storm when Zelda needed it most. They had meant acceptance when she had been rejected everywhere else. They had meant love when she had thought she would never find it, and they had meant home when she had been lost and alone. Preston had opened his door to Zelda that cold winter night, and in doing so, he had opened the door to a lifetime of love and happiness and family. He had given her everything, and she had given him just as much in return. Together they had built a life that was rich and full and meaningful, a life that mattered not just to them but to everyone they touched. And that, in the end, was the true legacy of Preston and Zelda Orchard. Not the ranch or the money or the success, though those things were important. The true legacy was the love they had shared and the kindness they had shown and the doors they had opened for others. It was the example they had set for their children and grandchildren and all the generations that would follow. It was the simple truth that sometimes all someone needs is for one person to open their door, to see them when others look away, to offer help when others offer rejection. And sometimes, that simple act of kindness can change everything, can turn a desperate situation into a love story for the ages. Preston and Zelda's story was proof that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that kindness could transform lives, and that keeping your door open to those in need was not just the right thing to do, but could lead to blessings beyond measure. Their story was proof that even in the harsh landscape of the Old West, even in the bitter cold of winter, warmth and love could flourish and endure. And so their story lived on, told and retold, cherished and celebrated, a reminder to everyone who heard it that love was always worth fighting for, that kindness was never wasted, and that sometimes the best things in life came from simply opening your door to someone who needed you. The wind still howled across the Wyoming plains in winter, just as it had that night when Zelda knocked on Preston's door. The snow still fell thick and heavy, transforming the landscape into a white wilderness. But at the Orchard Ranch, the lights still shone warm and welcoming from the windows, and the door was still always open, just as it had been for over a century. Because some traditions were worth keeping, and some promises were worth honoring, and some love stories were worth remembering forever. And the love story of Preston Orchard and Zelda Everhart was definitely one of those.